But now we want to take up our 1:45 p.m. item, 6.9, sitting as the Board of Directors, Lake County Watershed Protection District, consideration of reallocation of District 4 discretionary cannabis tax funds for advanced planning in the Scotts Valley and Highland Springs watersheds. Supervisor Green, I believe you want to introduce this item.
Yeah, if I could, thank you. It's kind of a twofer. On the one hand, it's just kind of a simple budget adjustment. On the other hand, the procedural history of this funding is coming up on 2 years now. So I just want to make sure, be respectful of all the processes involved here, and I'm very appreciative of Water Resources being here, Pawan and Angela, thank you. So going back nearly 2 years when I joined this board, it came to my attention there was an allocation made by former Supervisor Scott to Water Resources for what was then scoped as a vegetation management with possible sediment removal from a portion of Scotts Creek near Eichhoff Bridge. That project, as it was then proposed, hit some procedural snags in terms of rights of entry and all that, and then I started asking some cost-benefit questions along the way, and the original allocation anyway had not come to the board for approval, even though they were discretionary funds. It's a chunk of change, so the full board does have discretion to review this and approve it. So going back more than a year ago, I brought an item forward trying to get a little more clarity and try to give some options for Water Resources to explore. And so going back to that May 2023 item, at that time we were taking a look at a hydrological survey for Scotts Creek. We were looking in the early phases of how to scope the AEM project, or the aerial electromagnetic imaging studies of groundwater basins, and we also discussed whether there was a need for expanding in-stream flow monitoring. Well, so that was a year ago, and the direction at that time was to direct Water Resources to come up with a work plan and come back for approval. Well, you know, stuff changes in a year, including the reorganization of the department, the hiring of a new department head, and stuff goes on. So if there's any positive side to the delay, it's like in the meantime, lots of things happen. So we not only have funding now for a hydrological flow study of Scotts Creek and Tule Lake, we have a county-wide AEM project that includes Scotts Valley, but is not limited to Scotts Valley in its scope of work. There was one slight error in the staff report. Earlier today, we did hear an item about stream flow gauges, and so we are going to continue the stream flow gauges. The Watershed District is committing some funding to that for the next couple years anyway. But the main point is they're not recommending any expansion in stream flow monitoring. So the board's direction from May of 2023 was to explore these things. We got Water Resources delivered a whole bunch of funding for 2 of those bullet points, and we just heard an item today on the 3rd. So still wanting and desiring Water Resources to deliver what the board directed from last year, we kind of kicked some ideas around, and staff came up with their own ideas too. So basically the same allocation of $165,000 would be split. The new proposal for Scotts Valley is to basically do an add-on or a value-added study specific to flood risk within Scotts Valley, which is a chronic, ongoing, very serious concern. That would be, if I'm correct, would be added to the RFP for the hydrological survey, and so that would be an additional deliverable that the 100K would handle. And then if there is one thing I can take credit or blame for, Highland Springs Recreation Area Master Plan. It's a beautiful piece of land that we have not, nobody's fault, but we just haven't managed it adequately over the years. And our recent Lake County Parks, Recreation, and Trails Master Plan did suggest at least kicking the tires on whether public services could take a role in operations and maintenance of the developed park portions of Highland Springs, while the ongoing management of the larger watershed would stay with Water Resources. So that was kind of the basic game plan that staff came up with, and I supported it. We did take it out to the regional council, so Scotts Valley Advisory Council heard this last month and did give their approval of this concept. Big Valley Advisory Council heard it in mid-August and also gave their support of this concept. So with that, I think I've covered most of the procedural history. I did ask staff to be here if there's any questions about those bigger buckets of money and how it impacted the AEM and its scope and the groundwater imaging. I'm probably mixing those projects up. It can be hard to follow the bouncing ball of funding and projects and water resources as I'm learning, but I'm learning to roll with that and be very happy when they find money. And I think that's exactly where we're at right now. With that, I will shut up, and if I've misstated anything or if there are any questions regarding projects funded using other funding sources, staff is here to answer.
You have anything that you wish to add?
Angela DePalma-Dow, Lake County Water Resources. I think Supervisor Green summed that up appropriately. I do acknowledge the sources of the funding for the Scotts Creek Hydrological Survey is from the Wildlife Conservation Board, and then the aerial electromagnetic imaging studies is from the Blue Ribbon Committee for the Rehabilitation of Clear Lake. So those are the additional funding sources that are coming in that meet some of those projects that were originally part of the plan for those allocated funds.
Thank you. Supervisor Pyska?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the allocation, but it seems like dumping a lot of new priorities onto our new department head kind of midstream throughout the year. I do have a problem with that. I would prefer to wait until we can review priorities in our annual governance meeting to figure out where the priorities fall and when we start tackling different projects.
Please respond.
I'll pass over for 1 second. I will say that part of these alternative allocations actually, I think, help with some of the workload. The first one being that we're currently going forward with an RFQ for fish and wildlife management hydrology study project as part of the Greater Wildlife Conservation Board grant. So that's for the whole area of Scotts Creek, Tule Lake, as well as Adobe and Highland Creek. So those consultants will now have another charge to help us with the flood reduction plan in Scotts Creek. So it's actually helping alleviate a load off of our staff by being able to utilize that, those selected firms to do that. And then for the Highland Springs, that park, it's been hard to manage, but now we can share some of that with Parks Department, with Lars Ewing and his staff, as far as going forward and having organization for the master plan and how we want to manage that park. So it seems like these are things that seem like they'll help the staff. I'm going to let Pawan obviously provide his own input on how he feels about that, but these are pathways that are going to help us alleviate some of that help.
And I understand that. I guess the bigger issue is the Highland Springs master plan. Like, that is a brand new big project, and we've been working on the Parks and Rec plan for years, and I think Director Ewing can tell how involved that is. And so I just want to pause on that, make sure that we're not losing sight of the other priorities. You're doing a whole lot in that department. And so, I just want to make sure that we're not giving direction today. It's okay to transfer the funds and have them there, but I cannot, in good faith, give direction when I don't have a clear understanding of all the balls in the air right now.
Dr. Upadhyay, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I will say probably for the flood reduction, I guess that's something if that goes forward, probably would be okay. For the parks one, probably that will take us some time. We have to also find somebody who can do that specialized kind of work. So that will take some time. So I don't know whether we want to keep in our budget and then use it later on. But yeah, that would be something kind of new than what we have done previously.
Okay. Director Ewing, why don't you come up?
All right, Lars Ewing, Public Services Director. I apologize I wasn't up there. It's primarily a Watershed Protection District item, but excuse me. I think it's important just to recognize what is proposed here as a master plan for the park, which I would recommend be done, whether it's whether it remains with Water Resources or it's transferred. The organizational shift would, I would suggest, be considered as a part of that master plan. And we can use the term master plan, and that can mean a whole lot of things. Run the gamut down to kind of a feasibility assessment. So whatever is proposed there, again, regardless of the department that has the parks responsibility for that area, I would suggest that this be done. The Parks, Recs, and Trails, the county-wide Parks, Recs, and Trails kind of system master plan does recommend an evaluation of the management of Highland Springs, in particular, just to see if there can be some benefit in public services we do parks maintenance all the time, to see if there's a benefit in that. But again, I would, as the public services director with involvement with parks, I think it would be beneficial to have some sense of a master plan be started, regardless of who has responsibility.
And I don't disagree that it's needed. It's just, it feels really awkward right now to be changing priorities in the middle of finishing up our year. So that's where I am.
And I kind of, I don't want to argue, but I want to say, that wasn't this already allocated to something before? This is just moving the allocation. So you're not adding a project, you're changing your project.
Well,
Well, I think,
it's a different project.
I think there's a time arc here. So again, I'm about 2 years down this rabbit hole. So not only have the projects that Water Resources was directed to look at a year ago, the scope and the funding sources of those projects has changed. And yeah, that's a big chunk. That's a change from a year ago, but that's a change they're happy to undertake. Moving the money, I think that's basically the deliverable today. It doesn't say you have to get an RFP out today to get the flood risk study done. It doesn't even direct how to put out the RFP for the master plan for Highland Springs, but it gives them the opportunity and the tools to do that. They may well pivot, they may flex, mid-year and all that. You'll also see in here, just to avoid us coming back again, that if through some miracle they find alternative funding or other grants that they can fund one or both of these studies, there are unmet needs in both of those budget units in those watersheds. So if there's critical infrastructure needs and there's a project or two we can pick up because they've found alternative funding, I want to give them that flexibility. Conversely, like the money for the Highland Springs master plan, they may not even want to handle the RFP. We just went through a big old master plan process that Public Services shepherded. So if we had the money and Public Services had the bandwidth and desire to pick that up, I'm sure they could figure that out. So I'm not setting any firm deadlines or expectations on either of these deliverables, but on Highland Springs in particular. Such a precious resource, never has had an adequate master plan, and it's going to take not one but two departments probably to figure out where we're going to go from here. And we're only about 20, 30 years behind that. So I'd like to start the process. I'm not going to put a hard deadline on it. We're just going to move the money today to allow this to happen, and then we're going to trust our departments to make it happen.
Yes, that was my question, was if the money is allocated today for a specific purpose, when is the deadline for it to be used for that purpose or for it to be changed? But I just want to clarify and confirm that for these fund types through for the board allocation, you don't have any specific deadlines for those. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of any.
Unless you guys set something specifically or.
Well, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying.
Yeah.
We can do the funding allocation. I do not want to put a deadline on this. I don't want to dump things on
Right.
you. Right.
That's what I'm confirming.
I want to
Yeah, okay,
wait
right.
and see where we are and make sure that we're being, thoughtful and strategic with our priorities.
The money is not going anywhere. There's no timeline for the money to be utilized. It is, in better terms, a general fund specifically through the cannabis taxes that is through the discretion of District 4 supervisor on how to be spent. They're not going anywhere.
And if the next supervisor for District 4 comes in, there's no possibility of that being changed, correct, once it's approved today? On his discretion? He will have his own set of discretionary funds? This is just me clarification for the process, because I'm unsure.
I think it's already happened that it went from Supervisor Tina Scott to
Right.
Supervisor Michael Green, and it somewhat bordered the same topic. I don't know that there's a way. I'm looking at ACAO Carter to see if there's a way to lock it in, but I don't believe there is a way to lock it in.
There is no specific known way to lock it in because your board can adjust that.
And so today is simply an allocation without a set timeline from at least what Supervisor Green is mentioning. And so at that point, if there's a capacity to get started on it, it's up to you guys to get started on it. And if the money is spent, then the next supervisor in line will not be able to reallocate because it's gone.
Thank you.
That's the explanation I could provide.
Well, and to clarify further, potentially the next supervisor could change it, but they'd be in the same boat I am. Anything over 25K, we're coming back to the full board for this discussion and approval anyway. So I would assume even if there is desire to kick this can down the road and tweak it a little bit, again, you may get grant money from on high, and it changes that discussion. But I don't anticipate any change of direction. I have, kept Supervisor-elect Rasmussen apprised of many issues in this district, this one included. He did attend the Scotts Valley meeting where we discussed this. So he's aware of this allocation. I also spoke with former Supervisor Scott. So, this is not coming out of thin air. Again, this item today is an attempt to close the chapter on the direction this board gave in May of last year. And I think it's long past time that we put some finality to this funding.
Thank you very much.
I do actually have a quick question, Supervisor Green. Is this the funding that was from Supervisor Scott that was already transferred to Water Resources before you were on the board?
Yeah, so it got very specific in the memo, if you see it. So you'll see the budget units called out. There's an 8104, and then there's the only transfer. The reallocation involves a transfer of 65K from 8104 to 8109. It's a different flood zone.
Thank you for the reassurance. Any further comments or questions? All right, let's open it up for the public. Anyone wish to speak on this item? And I will bring it back to the board. I'll just make a quick comment. I appreciate you continuing to focus on that area. It's unfortunate the amount of flooding that does occur in that area, and hopefully in the near future we'll be able to find some solutions to help those folks out that live out there. So thank you.
There's nothing further. Sitting as the Board of Directors for the Lake County Watershed Protection District, I move to direct staff to use District 4 discretionary cannabis tax funds previously allocated to Budget Unit 8104 to develop the Scotts Valley Flood Risk Reduction Plan at a cost not to exceed $100,000 total and/or to address critical infrastructure needs or projects.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Also move to direct staff to reallocate District 4 discretionary cannabis tax funds not to exceed $65,000 from Budget Unit 8104 to Budget Unit 8109 to develop the Highland Springs Recreation Area Master Plan and/or to address critical infrastructure needs or projects.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, board.
Thank you.